A blind teenage girl is taken from her abusive father and promised a miracle, restored vision. But what she discovers inside the mansion is far darker than blindness. Trapped in a twisted game of control, her fight for freedom becomes a battle for her very soul. What was the real price of her sight? You won't believe how it ends. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next powerful story. Clara Reynolds had never seen a sunrise. Born blind, her world was stitched together by sound, scent, and sensation. A soft breeze brushing her skin, the scent of damp wood in the attic where she hid, or the way the old floorboards groaned like tired voices. Her father's house wasn't a home. It was a cage built with silence, bitterness, and the stifling sense that she was unwanted. At 15, Clara had learned to navigate not just the layout of the house, but the landmines of her father's moods. She could tell by the weight of his footsteps if the night would end in shouting or silence. Mostly, it was silence, the kind that pressed down on you until you couldn't breathe. Henry Reynolds was a man hollowed out by life. Once a construction worker with rough hands and sunburnt skin, he had unraveled over the years, first with grief, then with alcohol, and finally with rage. Clara never knew what had truly broken him. Maybe it was losing her mother, maybe it was having a blind daughter he couldn't fix. But whatever the reason, he never forgave Clara for existing. "You were supposed to be a new beginning," he mumbled one night, slurring as he dropped his cigarette onto the carpet. "But you came out broken." That was Clara's 12th birthday. She hadn't celebrated one since. The house was always cold, not from the weather, but from neglect. There was no laughter, no music, not even the dull hum of a television. Just the drip of a leaking faucet and the scratch of rats behind the walls. Clara found peace only in memories of her mother's lullabies, half-forgotten melodies whispered to her in the dark, before her mother vanished like a ghost. Sometimes she hummed those tunes to herself when the nights grew long and the walls felt like they were closing in. On one such afternoon, the stillness shattered. The doorbell rang, a foreign sound in their home. Clara froze mid-step, her fingertips brushing the chipped edge of the hallway wall. No one ever came here. No one ever visited. She heard her father's footsteps thump toward the front door. Then silence. Then voices. One of them wasn't his. Deep, calm, and unfamiliar, the stranger's voice rolled through the hallway like distant thunder. "Is this her?" he asked. There was something cold about the way he said it, like he was choosing furniture, not speaking about a human being. "That's her," Henry replied flatly. 15, blind since birth, no good to me. Clara's stomach twisted. She didn't understand what was happening, but every nerve in her body screamed danger. Before she could move, she felt a hand, foreign, firm, wrap around hers. "Let's go," the stranger said, his grip unyielding. "Dad?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Henry didn't answer. The door creaked, opened, and slammed behind them like the sound of finality. She wasn't given a goodbye, not even a glance. The air outside was colder than she remembered. The stranger guided her into a car, leather seats, smooth and cool against her hands. No words were exchanged. The engine rumbled to life, and the only sound was the tires crunching gravel as they pulled away from everything she had ever known. She sat rigidly, trying to steady her breath. Her cane had been left behind. Maybe on purpose, maybe as a message. She was no longer in control, not that she ever truly had been. "Where are we going?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "You'll see soon enough," the man answered, but Clara couldn't see, and the words felt like a threat, not a promise. The ride was long, too long. Time seemed to stretch and twist, each turn of the tires pulling her deeper into a world she hadn't agreed to enter. When the car finally stopped, the engine's silence was louder than the ride itself. The man opened the door and took her hand again, leading her across what felt like a stone path. Then metal gates creaked open, and Clara stepped into something that smelled sterile, like bleach and expensive perfume. Inside, the air was still. Too still. No ticking clocks, no human voices, just the sound of their footsteps echoing across a marble floor. The man didn't say a word. He led her down a corridor and into a room with a heavy door that shut behind her like the thud of a prison gate. "Sit," he said. She obeyed. Not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know what else to do. "What is this place?" she asked. Silence. Her hands clutched the armrests of the chair, It was padded, velvet, luxurious, out of place compared to the hard life she'd known. But it felt like a throne in a dungeon, designed to trick her into feeling comforted. She could sense something watching her. Not someone, something, a system, a plan. And she wasn't the architect. She was the raw material. Somewhere in the walls she thought she heard a whisper. A woman's voice, cool, distant. Get her ready for the procedure. Clara's blood turned to ice. She hadn't escaped a prison. She just entered a far more dangerous one. Clara sat motionless in the oversized velvet chair, her fingers digging into the soft upholstery as though she could tear away the secrets buried within the room's silence. The air smelled sharp, clean in a way that wasn't comforting. Sterile, like a place where living things didn't belong. The door clicked open behind her, and soft footsteps moved with purpose across the marble floor. A woman's voice, low and without warmth, cut through the tension like a scalpel. "Clara, I'm Evelyn. I'll be preparing you." Clara flinched. She hadn't even heard the woman approach. Evelyn sounded mechanical. Not unfriendly, but not human in the ways that mattered. Clara could sense it. There was no kindness behind the words, just routine. "Preparing me for what?" Clara asked, her voice tight with fear. "You'll find out soon," Evelyn replied smoothly. "There's no need to be afraid." But Clara was afraid. Every instinct in her screamed that something was terribly wrong. Still, Evelyn's grip on her arm was gentle, yet firm, as she led her down another hall. Clara's cane had still not been returned, and with her vision still gone, she had no bearings. Every step felt like a surrender. They entered another room, colder, brighter. Clara could feel it on her skin, the buzz of machines, the hum of overhead fluorescent lights. She was guided onto a bed that felt too clean, too polished. The kind of bed meant not for rest, but for procedures. "I didn't agree to anything," Clara said suddenly, her voice stronger this time. "Whatever this is, I don't want it." "You'll thank us later," Evelyn murmured, slipping something rubbery over Clara's arm. A blood pressure cuff, maybe. A heartbeat monitor beeped to life beside her. The door opened again. This time, the footsteps were heavier, slower. "Ah, Clara," came Isaac Monroe's voice, smooth as silk and just as cold. "I hope Evelyn's been treating you well." Clara's lips tightened. "What is this place?" "A sanctuary," Isaac said simply. "A chance for something better." Clara turned her head in his direction. "Better for who?" Isaac didn't answer. Instead, she heard the rustle of paper, the clink of metal instruments being arranged on a tray. "You've lived your whole life in darkness. We're offering you sight, Clara, not just metaphorically, but literally. A procedure, cutting edge, revolutionary. You'll be able to see." The words hit her like a shockwave. She'd dreamed of that her entire life, what it would be like to see light, color, shapes, to no longer rely on echoes and touch. But this wasn't a dream. This was something else, a bargain she hadn't agreed to. "And what do you get?" she asked, her voice quivering. Isaac chuckled softly. "Nothing you wouldn't be happy to give, in time." Before Clara could respond, a sharp prick pierced her arm. She gasped and tried to pull away, but Evelyn held her steady. "Just something to help you relax," she said. The room started to drift. Her limbs felt heavy, her thoughts slowed. Her heartbeat thudded louder than the machines beside her. Panic surged in her chest, but her body wouldn't obey. She was sinking like a stone into deep water. Then everything went black. She didn't know how long she was under. Minutes? Hours? When she came to, the light behind her eyelids felt different, warmer, brighter. For the first time in her life, Clara opened her eyes and saw something. Blurry, soft outlines, shapes swimming through fog. But they were there. Her vision had returned, or at least something like it. She gasped, blinking rapidly. Evelyn stood over her, her sharp features now visible, angular and cold. Clara turned her head and saw Isaac in the corner of the room, watching her with unsettling satisfaction. "Welcome back," he said softly. "Beautiful it?" Clara's heart pounded. She should have felt joy. Instead, all she felt was dread. "What now?" she whispered. Isaac approached, his expression calm, almost proud. "Now you belong here, with us, and soon you'll understand what that means." "I never agreed to any of this," Clara snapped, finding her voice again. "You took me." "You were given," Isaac replied, his voice still infuriatingly gentle. "And in return, you were given sight, comfort, safety. That's not a bad deal." She struggled to sit up, her vision swimming with each movement. "I didn't ask for it." He leaned in closer, his tone sharpening. but you'll repay it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Clara stared at him, newly awakened eyes wide with horror. She didn't know what he meant, not fully, but every part of her screamed the same truth. This wasn't kindness, it was ownership, and she was the product. The days that followed blurred together like a fever dream, too quiet, too clean, too controlled. Clara's vision, though still cloudy and fragile, had sharpened just enough to reveal the truth she hadn't needed eyes to feel. This place was not a sanctuary. It was a stage. And she was being dressed up for something she hadn't auditioned for. Evelyn continued to tend to her with robotic precision, feeding her carefully measured meals, monitoring her medication, walking her through basic visual exercises. But behind the rehearsed smiles and cold professionalism, Clara noticed it. Hesitation. A flicker of something human in Evelyn's eyes when Clara flinched at a touch or asked one too many questions. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plant a seed of hope. Each night, Clara lay awake in her lavish, sterile room, listening to the subtle hum of the security system and the faint mechanical whir of cameras panning in the halls. She was being watched, studied, like livestock in a polished lab. And yet no one ever answered the one question that haunted her more than any other. One evening, as the moonlight spilled in faint silver lines across the marble floor, Clara finally asked Evelyn the question directly. "Why did he choose me?" Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "What is he really planning?" Evelyn paused. For once, she didn't dodge the question. "Because you were invisible," she said softly. No one would come looking, no one would question it. The words were like a blade drawn slowly across Clara's chest. The confirmation stung, but it wasn't a surprise. She'd always felt invisible, even before she was taken. Later that night, Clara pretended to sleep as Evelyn adjusted the IV by her bedside. When she was sure Evelyn had gone, she sat up slowly and crept to the door. Her eyesight, though far from perfect, had improved enough to recognize the hallway, long, white, empty. She followed the echo of her bare feet on tile, heart pounding with each step. Doors on either side were locked. But then, one slightly ajar. She pushed it open and stepped into a room filled with shelves, files, records. A single computer sat on a desk, screen still glowing. Clara approached it cautiously. The screen was open to an internal email system. She scrolled, her breath hitching at the subject lines. Shipment 3 confirmed. Subject, Clara Reynolds, transfer pre-approval. Scheduled grooming program, phase 2. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just about her. There were others, maybe dozens, maybe more. And grooming wasn't about hair or manners. It was about preparing her for something or someone. She clicked open the most recent message, her name, her file, age, medical history. A note at the bottom that made her knees buckle. Confirmed viable. Procedure successful. Ready for asset integration. Awaiting final ownership transfer. ETA, 7 days. She staggered back, crashing into the wall, heart racing. 7 days? Transfer? Ownership? What the hell had they turned her into? That night, she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Evelyn noticed. She always noticed. "You found something," the nurse said flatly, folding a blanket at the end of the bed. Clara didn't answer. "You don't understand the whole picture," Evelyn added after a beat, her tone laced with something that might have been regret. "Then explain it," Clara snapped. "Tell me what I'm being sold into." Evelyn hesitated longer this time, the silence stretching between them like a fault line. Finally, she exhaled and sat at the edge of the bed. "This place, it didn't start out like this," she whispered. "Years ago, we were a medical research institute. Real treatments, real breakthroughs. Then Isaac bought it. Private funding, no oversight. He turned it into a marketplace." "A marketplace for what?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For people," Evelyn said, eyes downcast. "For bodies, for control. He calls it selective restoration. Find the broken ones, give them what they've always wanted, and in return he gets ownership." Clara wanted to scream, run, break something, but she couldn't even feel her fingers. "You helped him," she choked out. "You helped him do this to people like me." "I did," Evelyn admitted. "Until now." "What changed?" Clara asked bitterly. "You," Evelyn said, looking her in the eye for the first time. "You reminded me what fear looks like, what hope sounds like." A long silence followed, broken only by the distant hum of electricity. "There's a way out," Evelyn said finally. "A tunnel. Staff used to use it during emergencies, but you'll need help, you'll need me." Clara didn't trust her, not completely, but she didn't have the luxury of purity anymore. She had 7 days, maybe less, and she would not be passed off like merchandise. "Then help me," Clara said, "because I'm not staying here another week." Evelyn stood, her face hardening with resolve. "Then we start tonight." Clara had never run before. Not really. Not with purpose. Not with fear clawing at her lungs and adrenaline burning like fire through her veins. But that night, with Evelyn gripping her wrist and shadows rising on every wall, she ran like her life depended on it. Because it did. They slipped out through the lower wing of the estate, the part where cameras had long since failed or were accidentally unplugged by Evelyn during her night shift. The hallway was dim, silent, and impossibly long. Every door looked identical. Every second stretched into eternity. Clara kept close to the wall, her breath tight in her throat, her eyes trying to make sense of the dim shapes and flickering lights. The world still looked like it was underwater, but she could see enough to know that they were alone. For now, they reached a steel door disguised behind a row of janitorial lockers. Evelyn slid a keycard through the hidden slot, and the lock buzzed with a low mechanical groan. "Down here," she whispered, pulling the door open. Behind it was a narrow staircase that led deep underground, colder with every step. The concrete walls were damp, lined with old piping and flickering bulbs overhead. The air smelled of rust and mildew, but to Clara, it was the scent of hope. "How long does the tunnel go?" she asked between breaths. "3/4 of a mile. It leads to a service exit at the edge of the property, somewhere they never thought anyone would bother checking." "And you're sure they don't know?" Evelyn paused, glancing over her shoulder. "They will, sooner or later." They moved quickly through the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in eerie rhythm. Clara's body ached from the sudden sprint, but she didn't dare stop. Her mind flashed back to Isaac's voice, the way he'd smiled when he told her she belonged to him. She wanted to scrub it from her brain, tear it away like the hospital gown she once wore. Halfway through the tunnel, a loud metallic clang echoed behind them. Evelyn spun around, her face pale. That was the gate. "They're coming," Clara whispered, panic rising like bile. "We have to move. Now." They broke into a run. Clara could feel her legs weakening, her breath becoming ragged. But she pushed forward, focused on the sliver of light far ahead, an emergency exit sign glowing green like a lighthouse in a sea of concrete. They reached the final door. Evelyn slid another key from her coat, fumbling with the lock as Clara looked behind them. Voices, footsteps, getting closer. Evelyn finally wrenched the door open, and cold night air rushed in like a slap to the face. The sky was dark, moonless, and the wind carried the scent of pine and damp soil. Clara stumbled forward, out of the tunnel, and into the woods beyond the property. But they weren't free yet. They hadn't taken 5 steps when headlights cut through the trees. A black SUV, coming fast. "Run!" Evelyn shouted, grabbing Clara's hand again. They darted into the woods, branches slapping their faces, twigs cracking underfoot. Clara's newly restored vision was still adapting to darkness, but she could make out tree trunks, dips in the ground, the glint of headlights chasing them from behind. "Keep low," Evelyn hissed. "We're close to the service road." Gunshots cracked in the distance, warning shots or something worse. Clara didn't look back. Her lungs screamed for air, her legs for rest, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. They burst out of the trees onto gravel. An old pickup truck sat idling at the edge of the road. An old man behind the wheel, startled by the sudden appearance of 2 wild-eyed women. "Drive," Evelyn shouted. "Please, just go." To his credit, the man didn't ask questions. He reached over, flung open the passenger door, and Clara climbed in. Evelyn scrambled into the back just as the SUV roared into view behind them. The driver, who smelled of motor oil and tobacco, slammed on the gas. The truck jolted forward, tires spitting gravel, engine groaning under the sudden speed. Clara ducked, her heart pounding louder than the engine. In the rearview mirror, the SUV followed for half a mile before peeling off, vanishing into the trees like a shadow recoiling from the light. They didn't speak for several minutes. Just breathed. Just existed. Finally, the old man broke the silence. "Someone want to tell me what in God's name I just drove into?" Clara looked at him, her voice quiet but clear. "You saved me from being sold." He blinked, uncertain whether he'd heard her right. Evelyn didn't elaborate. Neither did Clara. Because how could she explain it all? How could she explain the cold halls, the cameras, the whispers of ownership and integration? How could she explain what it felt like to go from invisible to property? Instead, Clara leaned back against the seat, her muscles trembling from exertion and fear. But underneath it all, beneath the fatigue and panic, there was something else. Resolve. She didn't know where the truck was headed, didn't know where the road would take her. But for the first time since that steel door closed behind her back home, Clara felt like she had a choice. And she was choosing to live. The little apartment wasn't much, just 2 rooms above a hardware store in a sleepy coastal town where the ocean always seemed to hum in the background. The floorboards creaked, the windows whistled when the wind picked up, and the heater took its sweet time getting warm. But to Clara, it was a palace. 3 weeks had passed since the escape, since the night she fled from Isaac Monroe's twisted empire of control and possession. Since Evelyn pulled her through a tunnel that led not just into the woods but into a new life. A real one. They kept a low profile, changed their names. Evelyn dyed her hair, Clara wore glasses, more to disguise herself than for actual need, though her vision still flickered between clarity and haze. Every sound on the street below made her heart hitch, but slowly, the panic began to loosen its grip. Healing came in whispers, not in leaps. Clara had taken a job at a local community center, helping children with disabilities, especially blind ones. It was simple work, reading stories aloud, helping with tactile exercises, giving quiet encouragement, but it filled her in a way she didn't expect. In them, she saw reflections of her younger self. Afraid, isolated, misunderstood. And now, she could be the voice she once wished for in the dark. Some nights, the dreams came. The cold white rooms, Isaac's voice saying she owed him everything, the sensation of being watched, being prepped, being bought. She would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, clutching the sheets like a lifeline. But every time, she reminded herself, he can't touch me anymore. One evening, Clara sat on the small balcony, a mug of warm tea cupped between her hands. The sea wind kissed her skin as the lights of the town twinkled like stars fallen to earth. Evelyn stepped outside, wearing a heavy sweater and holding a letter. "It's for you," she said quietly. "Came through a secure drop box, no return address." Clara's stomach knotted. She took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. Typed. Formal. "Miss Clara Reynolds. This is not a threat, it's a reminder. You were selected because you were special. That hasn't changed. We were building a future, not a prison. We gave you the world, and you ran from it. But no matter where you go, you will always be part of the design. We hope you'll return. When you're ready." I am Clara's hands trembled. Evelyn looked at her, reading the tension in her face. "Do you want to disappear again?" Evelyn asked. "We can. I know how." Clara shook her head. "No, I'm tired of hiding. You're not safe if he still has people." "No," Clara said again, firmer. "I'm not going to run anymore." The truth was she'd run her whole life from her father's cruelty, from silence, from helplessness. But now, even with the past still clawing at her heels, Clara felt something stronger building in her chest. She folded the letter slowly and slid it into the flame of a nearby candle. It curled, blackened, turned to ash. "That's the last thing he'll ever send me," she whispered. Later that week, she stood in front of a mirror in the hallway of the community center. Her reflection still startled her sometimes. Seeing her own face, real, illuminated, with all its imperfections, was like rediscovering a story she thought she'd lost. She had freckles. She had eyes that were more green than brown. She had a smile that had started to come back. One of the children she worked with, Jasmine, 8 years old, blind since birth, tugged gently at Clara's sleeve. "Miss Clara," she whispered, "what do you look like?" Clara knelt beside her and smiled. "I look like someone who finally got out." Jasmine tilted her head, puzzled. Clara chuckled softly. "I'll tell you someday, when you're older." That night she wrote a letter, not to Isaac, but to herself. She didn't plan to send it. She just needed to say the words. "They tried to own me, shape me, rewrite me, but I'm not a product, not a project, not a promise to fulfill. I'm a person, and no one gets to claim my life but me. I may carry scars, but they are mine. And they mean I survived." She signed it simply, Clara. The next morning, she walked barefoot to the shoreline just as the sun was rising. Waves kissed her toes and gulls cried overhead. She stood there for a long time, letting the wind whip through her hair. And then she whispered to herself, softly but with conviction, "This is my life, my story. No one takes it from me ever again." She turned away from the ocean and walked back toward town, sunlight catching in her hair like a crown. Behind her, the waves erased her footprints. Ahead of her, the road was open. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't just surviving. She was living. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Clara's story. Your presence means more than you know. This journey was more than just about escape. It was about reclaiming identity, finding courage when the world tries to silence you, and learning that survival isn't enough. We are all worthy of truly living. Clara's story teaches us that no matter how broken we may feel, we are never beyond healing. We are not what others do to us. We are what we choose to become after the storm. If this story moved you, even just a little, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We'd love to connect with you. And if you believe in powerful emotional stories that spark reflection and hope, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep bringing you more heartfelt narratives that stay with you long after the video ends. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never let anyone write your story for you.